Good morning, everyone. Huge welcome to the Chamber of Shipping's first event on international trade sustainability. I'm going to be very quick. I'm Peter Elliott, Director of Policy at the Chamber. Many of you will know me anyway. I do recognise it's quite a sticky day, but hopefully sitting down now will reduce the energy output. I'd like to introduce you to Nusrat Ghani, Minister for Business and Trade. Can I say enduring friend of the Chamber?
Yes,
would that be appropriate?
Yes.
But very warm welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Peter, and thank you to Graham and the Chamber for inviting me. I'm speaking at the top, and I won't be staying for the debate. I'm in front of the Business and Trade Select Committee in about 45 minutes, and the chairman said to me they're going live whether I turn up or not. So I have to speak and dash back to Westminster. But I am absolutely delighted to be with you to celebrate the launch of your new report. And the topic before us today, building resilience through trade, absolutely critical to me and my department. And I'm really excited to see this debate taking place, and my officials will be updating me what is discussed, do not doubt that. Global events have demonstrated the centrality of maritime across almost all sectors of our economy, and just what happens when trade flows dry up. The UK is one of the top 10 UK economies best connected to the global liner network, so this conversation is of the utmost importance to the economic vitality and continued growth of not only our sector, but the UK as a whole. With a maritime history spanning centuries, shipping has helped to shape the island's identity and enrich its lifeblood. This is why I welcome the UK Chamber of Shipping's Value of Shipping report, which stands testament to the importance shipping plays in the UK and the economy, and of course, our national identity. The statistics your report brings out are extraordinary. Shipping contributes £6.6 billion to the UK's economy annually and generates £18 billion in GVA, while directly employing 61,000 people and directly supporting 417,000 jobs. It's such huge numbers. So what you all do is vital to keeping this country going in so many ways. To that end, my department is committed to supporting investment into maritime infrastructure, modernising and enhancing our logistic capabilities, and promoting innovation and decarbonisation for a sustainable maritime future. One of this government's primary objectives that we set out in Glasgow in 2021 is to reach net zero by 2050, and we all play a part in that ambition. We must ensure that maritime sector is sustainable and look to the future. Although decarbonisation is a global challenge, it also represents a terrific opportunity as we are forward-thinking and innovative enough, as we definitely are in the UK. The maritime sector is pivotal to reaching our commitment to net zero emissions. As the report notes, the UK has 46 active offshore wind developments which have 14 gigawatts of capacity, and we have 115 potential and planned wind developments that will expand this considerably. These stats are brilliant. I'll be repeating them in my select committee hearing in about half an hour's time. Encouraging the development and adoption of sustainable technologies in the maritime sector, cleaner fuels, energy-efficient vessels and green infrastructure is key to reaching our 2050 zero-emission goals. To further support the future of a sustainable maritime sector, my department is working across Whitehall and hand in hand with industry to support investment. That is why the government's Maritime 2050 plan places decarbonisation and sustainability at the very heart of our vision for ensuring the UK remains a world-leading maritime nation. Why this government has set up the UK Shipping Office for Reducing Emissions with the DfT to tackle shipping emissions and advance this country towards a sustainable shipping future. Expanding trade is a cornerstone of my department, and it is my honour to be the minister responsible for global supply chains. I don't think there was a minister for supply chains until I turned up and said I wanted critical minerals and supply chains to have its own portfolio. For me and for all of us, it matters so much in today's interconnected world. Our critical supply chains are the arteries of global trade. We have negotiated trade agreements worldwide, open the doors for UK businesses, and a commitment to a robust maritime sector and expanding trade extends to safeguarding our critical supply chains, ensuring their resilience in the face of challenges. pursuing international collaboration that ensures our maritime sector continues to serve in keeping our country moving, which is why this government has already developed several sector-specific supply chain resilience strategies. I will also be publishing a critical import strategy this autumn to drive government and businesses to action with us to strengthen our resilience. And every step of the way, I have ensured that a maritime representative was one of those panels, enabling me to understand better what you need. Moreover, we are advocating for the reduction of trade barriers globally, recognising that free and fair trade is a key driver for economic growth, promoting a rules-based international trading system that brings benefits to businesses big and small. Maritime is a vital component of this vision. Before I leave you today, I want to put a few questions to you, and I hope you will consider during your panel. How do we collectively agree, not only between government and industry, but also between private sector entities and the routes that should and will be taken as a matter of conducting business and cooperative investment? What policy and regulatory changes are needed to produce the environment needed for these routes? And how does the decarbonisation lead to meaningful change, not only for our net zero goals, but also how does it lead to meaningful change that produces truly resilient supply chains? These are some of the things I'll be answering with my supply chain import document, but I'll be grateful to hear you discuss this as well. So let's keep working together, government and industry, as we chart our course towards a greener future for us all, full of good jobs, investment and economic growth. Ensure the UK continues to be a proud world-leading maritime nation with shipping, UK shipping, at its very heart. Thank you so much. I've now got to get back to Parliament, so my apologies once again. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Minister, and good luck with the day job. All right, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the UK Chamber of Shipping's panel discussion on building resilience through trade. I'm James Baker, I'm the containers editor at Lloyd's List, and it's a pleasure to be hosting this for you today. A couple of housekeeping things just before we start. No fire alarm test today, so if a repeating alarm does go off, please make your way calmly to the exits. The staff will guide you out to the meeting point, which is at St Mary Garden, just outside. There are toilets downstairs, and just in case anyone needs reminding, could you please put your phones to silent just to allow the speakers to be heard without disruption. Briefly from me, for all of us working around shipping, trade is the absolute bedrock of our industry, but it seems at times that the business of doing trade is getting more and more complicated and challenging, and certainly more complex. That's reflected in the increasingly, I guess, challenging, complex world in which we live, one that's fraught with geopolitical challenges and is struggling with economic hardships in a number of economies. We've got a war in Europe, economies are struggling to fend off recessions and high rates of inflation, and the recovery from the pandemic has remained relatively patchy. At the same time, the world and the shipping industry is facing climate change, challenges of climate change, and the necessary decarbonisation that is required to at least try and put a halt to that warming. But that paints a relatively depressing picture, and we should be cognizant of the remarkable achievements of this industry in which we're all associated. Despite the disruptions to the supply chains during the pandemic, we still managed to keep the ships moving, keep goods and energy coming into the country to keep the lights on and keep the shops stocked and the economy moving. As the Minister pointed out, we have the report from the UK Chamber, which rightly celebrates the role of shipping in the UK, where we're supporting over 500,000 jobs and I'm told facilitating over £1 trillion in international trade. So how we manage trade by sea is increasingly important in an uncertain and unstable world. And today we hope to be able to get some insight into that from our speakers and explore the role of trade ensuring a sustainable trade that helps rather than hinders in global resilience. So I'm joined today by Rio Tinto's Laura Barragan, CMA CGM's Audrey Dolan, and Clarkson's researchers, Stephen Gordon. We'll turn to the questions and the panel discussion in a few minutes, but first up we're going to hear from Stephen, who's going to help set the scene for the discussion. So I'll hand over to Stephen and be back with you shortly. Thank you. Stephen.
Yeah, well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you to the Chamber for the invitation to speak. I'm Steve Gordon. I'm the Global Head of Clarkson Research. We're part of the broader Clarkson's group. We have about 150 people globally collecting data and intelligence about the shipping markets. And just for 5 minutes or so, I'd like to set the scene with a few data points, just to explain shipping's vital role in global trade and some of the disruption challenges that we faced as an industry. My first chart, ladies and gentlemen, is just that. It's 12 billion tons of seaborne trade. 85% of all trade is seaborne. And in front of you, you can see the main industries involved. Energy, and when we talk about energy transition, nearly 40% of shipping's volumes are energy related. We have the steel industry at metals at 23%, agriculture at 11%. Containers is lower, but this is all in tons. And so if we did these statistics in value, they'd look quite different. And then finally, we have some other markets that are all important: cars, chemicals, and others. So shipping absolutely at the heart of global trade. 12 billion tons is where we think the number is today. We're actually a little bit more optimistic about trade prospects in the short term than we were at the start of the year. We're thinking we might get to trade of about 12.2 billion tons by the end of this year. Again, importantly, you sometimes see the headlines, and we've had a lot of negative headlines out of China recently that have been negative in terms of value of imports and exports. But when we look at the volume of cargo being moved, it's quite positive this year, particularly on the energy side and even on some of the dry commodities, particularly when you look on the right-hand side, very strong growth in cars, very strong growth in the gases, coal, iron ore. So one of the challenges that shipping has, as always, is this great volatility. And in the past 3 or 4 years, 2 huge global events, it's been said previously, shipping right at the heart. And in some ways, the shipping industry is paid to manage the volatility and the disruption in the world economy. What we've seen in the last 4 years are 2 very extreme events. And if you look at the middle chart, that's showing you month-on-month trends. And you can see on the left-hand side the long-term development of global trade. We're running at about 1.6 tons for every person on the planet is moved by sea in a single calendar year. So lots of volatility and very much highlighted in the last 3 or 4 years. COVID. Well, COVID hugely disruptive for everybody. One of the things that I'd like to remind and highlight, and we did a lot of work on this at the time, shipping as a mode of transport actually recovered remarkably quickly. It was back to pre-pandemic levels in terms of volume of trade, far quicker than any other mode of transportation. And indeed, I think if you lined up every single sector of the economy, activity levels in shipping were back to normality within about 18 months. And I think that resilience is important. I think the shipping industry has stood up. The customer base has to pay for that disruption, and we saw that with the freight rates on the liner side and the dry cargo side in 2020 and 2021, and we're seeing it now when it comes to the oil industry and the gas industry and the shipping freight that's being there. So as you can see on the left-hand side, shipping are recovering relatively quickly. The one exception to that is the cruise industry, which for obvious reasons has only this year got back to the sort of passenger numbers that we were seeing pre-COVID. And of course, the congestion in port, which was a big theme during COVID. From a container side, that's my right-hand chart, simple data points, percentage of the world fleet, in this case, the container fleet. It doesn't sound a lot, 32% pre-COVID, 37% of capacity in a port during COVID, now back to normal. In a pure supply-demand market like shipping, that's enough to move the needle and get some of the freight rates that we saw in those couple of years. Second huge disruptive event, this terrible war in the Ukraine and the geopolitical response. In some ways, it's quite simple. You know, instead of moving oil and gas from Russia to Europe, it's moving long haul to China and India, and Europe itself is importing long haul in terms of gas, in terms of oil. Again, just to be simple about this, we've probably had, I would say, 3 to 4 years of typical growth in ton-mile demand for tankers in a 12 to 18-month period. And the shipping industry has stood up and responded, but of course that has come with a freight cost element, and we've seen very strong tanker markets in the past 2 years. And these charts just show you the LNG trade. It was 120 million tons from Russia to Europe pipeline. Apart from small amounts going through places like Hungary, that's basically zero now. You can see some of the trends on the grain, on the coal, and of course on the oil. So a complete redistribution of trade flows, which the shipping industry has managed, but that has come at a cost. And huge challenges for everybody in the industry when it comes to sanctions and the KYC piece, which is right on the agenda for lots of us in the industry. Two themes that I'd like to highlight for the longer term, which I'm sure will be discussed in the questions. Firstly, decarbonisation. I think this is the biggest factor that is occupying front and centre boardrooms around the maritime industry. We are 2.1% of CO2 emissions as shipping industry. We have brought that down quicker in the past 10 to 15 years than any other mode of transportation, principally because we're going slower as a fleet than we were back in 2008. But we have technology challenges, we have regulatory challenges. We're just at the start of a process that's taking many decades. We're very committed at Clarkson Research to understand the technology, not just the alternative fuels, but all the wonderful energy-saving technologies, the market impact assessment of going slower. And I believe the industry is very committed to this, but of course it's hugely challenging, but also provides huge opportunities. Energy transition. What will happen to that 40% of cargo that the shipping industry moves at the moment? Again, I don't think we need to look at this as always a negative. Most people believe the coal trade by sea will be lower in a decade than it is today. It's actually gone up in the last couple of years. So we have to be aware of this journey that we're going on. Gases, I think you can be positive about. Whether it's CO2, whether it's ammonia, I'm convinced there will be opportunities. The Minister mentioned the offshore wind industry. We've tracked that very closely. Hugely exciting growth. Could play a vital part in energy transition, and the shipping industry has to step up and support that industry as well. And then, of course, geopolitics, regionalisation, globalisation, reshoring, friendshoring. The world is becoming a more complex place. Trade is becoming more complex. We've had a long run, actually, of Western business norms generally prevailing as part of this long globalization pathway. At Clarksons, we still believe in trade growth going forward. We still believe in some of the benefits of Factory Asia. We think the growth rates will be slower in the future than the past, but we do think that the geopolitical situation is clearly going to create challenges as well as opportunities, and that's something that we're very focused on as a company. And my final slide is just emphasizing some of those complexities in trade that are building: distance, geopolitics, globalization or regionalization, as well as that underlying theme on decarbonization. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for those taking the time to listen to my introduction, and more than happy to share the slides afterwards via the organisers, and looking forward to chatting further. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. That was a great sort of landing ground on which we can take off from. If that's not mixing my metaphors. It's a year now since we were all at Shipping Week last year. Last year we were just starting to emerge out into blinking into the daylight again after a couple of years of being locked away on Zoom calls and so on. We're effectively coming out of a massive global event, which, yeah, it did change everything. I guess the question now, and this applies to everyone, is how's everything changed? What's this done to the shipping routes, to the trade routes that we've got, and how do we adapt to those changes? I mean, I'll start with you, Stephen. I mean, where do you see the major changes that have occurred out of the impact of the pandemic?
Well, I think we mentioned from the pandemic side. I think it's a little bit too early to talk about, a reversal of globalization and an end to factory Asia. And I'm sure the rest of the panel will speak about this. If you look at, for example, US imports of containers, although there's a decline in the share from China, actually the share from other parts of Asia is still very much the same. So I think it's a little bit early to say we're reversing globalization and that reshoring is I hear a lot of people talking about it. I'm not sure if we actually see it in the data. So that's maybe a comment on the liner side, but maybe I know it's changing all the time. Yeah. And then I think the other big point that I made was on the oil and gas side is this redistribution of flows on the energy side. And I think the Russia-Ukraine piece, less of an impact on dry cargo, but absolutely has had an impact on the liner industry and grain, of course, and indeed some ammonia was hit very hard as well. So I think Russia and Ukraine, mainly an energy story, and the pandemic, I think absolutely trends on the containers, but I think it's perhaps a bit too early to call a big reversal in previous trends.
Yeah.
Fully agree.
Yeah, pass that to George. I mean, you guys were there at the coalface during the supply chain crisis, and got us through that. It must have, it all hit suddenly. It must have come as a shock. And I mean, how does a company like CGM go like, whoa, this has happened, now this has happened, and now we're coming out the other end of it? What was the experience of that from the inside?
We are learning to be agile. Let's put it this way. We are learning to change our strategy according to the ever-changing environment, which is pretty much happening all the time. And especially since the past 2 to 3 years, it has been quite amazing and challenging and exhausting, but I guess it's been the same for everybody here. I fully agree and concur to what you have been saying. We are not going to be changing, and only go for regionalization and suddenly see a big shift. We are, however, seeing some changes happening, and to the scale of those regions that are developing, it's actually quite big for those cases. But if, for example, you are seeing a big surge of volume, like you were mentioning, the US is still importing a lot of volume from Asia, although less from China. A country like Vietnam is developing a lot their volume. But when a country like Vietnam is growing by 30%, China is decreasing by 1%. So you are going to still have very much those big volumes still happening. Yeah. Although we are adapting, and we are adapting to the ever-changing. You were talking about the routes changing. Yes, the routes are changing. Today, for example, we are seeing a lot more. So I handled Europe now. It's been a week that I am here in London. So first event, thank you for having me. And taking care and having a big focus on Europe. What I see is that there is a big development of the Eastern Europe volumes into Western Europe and into the US. There has been huge amount of investments happening, indirect investments happening during the past 10 years into the Eastern Europe. And also the region is actually located strategically very well because there's a huge shipping corridor which is allowing them to do. We're seeing lots of volumes growing out of Koper in Slovenia, etc. So this is something that we are very much seeing big developments into. If you look at Europe also, we're seeing lots of will to shift production in Europe as much as possible. So in Europe, you must have heard about the developments of all those gigafactories that are being developed all over Europe. So we are seeing quite a few in the UK, we are seeing quite a few in the north of France, a lot in Germany, in Sweden, and all those developments are going to allow us to see two phases of things. So first, a lot of imports still from Asia, and this is what we're starting to see in order to allow the constructions of all those gigafactories. But then we are going to be seeing a second phase starting from next year onwards, where we are going to be seeing imports of raw material much less than what it used to be, and to allow those gigafactories, which are mainly for the construction of cars and batteries of cars, but also some other industries, but that's the main of it for the time being. And we're going to see a lot of exports growing from Europe with those developments of gigafactories. So yes, we are seeing developments of those big factories. We are seeing developments of new corridors. Nearshoring is happening. Volumes are growing like crazy in Mexico. Volumes are growing like crazy in Brazil. We are seeing South America volumes growing a lot. And those are, for example, for Mexico, we are seeing a big amount of volume that is going to be shifting into the US compared to, for example, importing from Asia. We are not going to see it only on ships, but this is going to be mainly by trucks also that is going to be developing this. Nearshoring, we're seeing, for example, Turkey developing a lot their volume, but the main of the volume is going to remain from Asia.
Yeah.
And so in Asia, like you said, we're seeing a little bit less of China, more of Southeast Asia, but like I said, China is going to remain very big for those years to come. So China plus one is a strategy more and more. We're going to see it develop, but the base is going to remain. This is what I would say.
Okay, thank you. Laura, you're based in Asia, so you can address that. But firstly, we all know what happened in the sort of containerized supply chains during the pandemic. The bulk markets, the commodity markets, it seemed to me not so bad. That's my impression, but was that the actual case? Can you, I mean, what was your experience going through it and coming out of it? And then we move on to what your view of the Asian markets as a local.
No, absolutely, thanks, James. Look, I'll start first and foremost, to acknowledge that actually throughout COVID and actually until, beginning of the year, where China also reopened more gradually, all these global trades on the shipping point of view were materialized, because of seafarers that hold, the line on to basically spending more than they used to be months at sea. And so I think, we need to really bring to the fore, these men, few women, that basically enable us, to be able to continue to operate and live. And sacrificing a lot, of their family time actually in spending months at sea. So, and again, today still seeing some easing on the shore leaves, but we're not yet there. It's still, very difficult for them. So really want to acknowledge them and thank them for enabling, this global trade over the past few years. In terms of market shifts, essentially we're seeing. And we heard a bit the minister, and I think, across the board, I was in North America last year, governments are basically all speaking, three key components, which are, they're going on board, towards the energy transition, which we spoke about, and I'm sure will impact also further. Food security, not just because of the Ukraine war, but overall, securities of supply chain, which is also the third one, securities of supply chain, resilience of supply chains, as they are also looking at reindustrializing some of their regions. Europe started already, but the US as well with the new Inflation Reduction Act is also, looking to reindustrialization. So as we are seeing, and Audrey alluded also to that part, we're seeing basically a shift as well in the redistribution of the supply chains as the policies of governments have changed, to meet these targets. So climate change, securities of food and securities of supply chain, but energy and raw materials for their reindustrialization needs. So towards the energy transition, but also reindustrialization, we're definitely seeing, that copper, aluminium, and to also a greater extent, lithium will basically play a role to the energy transition.
This goes to the gigafactories.
Yeah, exactly. But then also, in terms of metal processing, a lot of copper and aluminium, more than 50% of the world production is sitting in China. So that's also, what governments are looking at in terms of reindustrialization. So all of this will, in nature, reshuffle the trades from ores, whether it's copper concentrates, also, to basically metals themselves. But what we're also anticipating is that, although, we're now entering, shortly, the mid of the 2020s decade, we're seeing a big pull, on this material, but we still need to basically bring more mines to operate, to really see a significant shift and increase from 2030 onwards, to really drive this energy transition and reach net zero by 2050. But on a population point of view, this is also another driver where we also see that by 2050, there will be an additional 2 billion human beings on Earth, so which needs to be fed, but also need to have a house as well, and have the particularly towards the development of a certain region. Africa will definitely take a growth path, by 2050. That requires, as well, more grain, but also more steel for the infrastructure. So steel, we're still seeing that as a big role to play, which again, going through itself, like the other metals, its own energy transition going forward. So this shift, will definitely impact all the trades. But also if I take the example of steel, and basically the imperative also to decarbonize steel, which is a big burden. It's a market, just for people not knowing what we're talking about, and the steel industry is about 1.8 billion tons of steel that the world is consuming today. And that represents about 3 billion tons of CO2 emission, 8% of the global emissions. So shipping is at 3 around, steel, and also aluminium and so on are very high in terms of carbon footprint. So they really need as well to decarbonize this industry. And for that, they need not only the fact that they need to be powered by clean energy, like all the metals, which are often energy intensive. They also need to change their processes. So they need to go through technology breakthrough. And what we're seeing in the steel industry, the technology breakthrough will require that they are moving for arc furnaces to a direct reduction injection, which require hydrogen. And we'll come back, I'm sure, to the hydrogen that everybody wants in the industry. So to do so, they need either to be closer to hydrogen production, so that will also change a bit the dynamic of the supply chain, where everything is integrated, the ore, the iron ore goes to the steel mills, and where basically all that processing is happening. Or basically there will be a kind of iron ore close to hydrogen production, because it's difficult to carry hydrogen, and then at some point, go to where the steel mills are. But also the chase for higher grades, which also, will accompany this process change. So when we have standard grades or even low grades in Australia, for example, where we operate, we are seeing, that in Canada, where we've got very high grade iron ore, and in Africa, where we're developing a project in Guinea, that will be more suitable as well for this technology change. So all of this dynamic is also, impacting, as we're seeing going forward, the trades.
You mentioned this reindustrialization, which I guess is another way of discussing nearshoring, friendshoring, reshoring. For a commodities operator, I guess that's in some ways really good for ton-mile demand. That's going to, if you're shipping coal or iron ore from Brazil to Europe, it's no different from shipping it from Brazil to China. On the other hand, if goods are being made in Europe, in Eastern Europe, rather than being shipped from China, and Stephen's probably got the overview on that, so I'll get it from each of you. But this reindustrialization to the US, to Europe, do you see that being beneficial or negative to trading patterns, to the business that you're in, to the side of the sector that you're in? Let's start with Laura.
Yeah, look, it's if you look, Rio Tinto is a mining and metal company, so definitely we're looking towards our portfolio of products. So developing copper and aluminium, definitely as the world will need even more of this product that we're producing. We are also, having 2 projects on the lithium side, one in Serbia, the other one in Argentina. To be able, to provide this materials as well to the world. So it's essentially basically looking at that perspective. So really focusing on this product to accompany the energy transition. And as I mentioned earlier, on the iron ore point of view, our strong base is Australia. We'll remain Australia, where we're developing, but we are more also chasing high grade. So Guinea is where we're developing the Simandou project there. And reinforcing our operation in Canada.
So that's sort of expanding those global...
Yes, exactly. Repositioning the portfolio of product and working hard, towards the decarbonization of our own industry. But also, working towards accompanying our customers in their own decarbonization. Just to give you a bit of perspective, so Rio Tinto is about 35 million tons of CO2 emission, most of it actually being in the metal sector, so aluminium ahead, with 75% of our energy supplies that are clean. Okay, so we're just on 25%, that represents, this 35 million tons. If you look at our customers, their CO2 emission is nearly 600 million tons. Okay, so we also have an imperative in helping them, particularly towards the grades of iron ore, helping them, on the technology front. Actually, Rio Tinto is operating a technology breakthrough on the aluminium side, which is called the ELYSIS technology, which aims at removing CO2 production itself, but also, how to replace electrons that we are using, the 25% part that is missing in our portfolio, into green electrodes.
Flip that question over again. How is this, if we risk having shorter supply chains for the finished goods if we're reindustrializing, how does the container shipping sector deal with that, confront that? Or am I over-imagining it? Is it not going to be an issue? If we're talking, because you've talked before about Mexico becoming a big source for the US in terms of production. Does that mean shorter trade lanes for you and for the finished goods, or?
Oh, it's going to be some shift around. Like I said,
it's
going to be quite minor. We have now ports that are able to handle big ships in more and more places every day. And so our ships are pretty much able to go everywhere. And we adapt. We adapt. I was mentioning about Mexico growing. We have definitely seen a big growth of that business, and we just simply put ships there and adapted ourselves
the ship will go
to
anywhere.
it. And so we have that capacity today. Today more than 2 years ago. 3 years ago there was a big lack of ships. There was barely 1.5% ships available at sea. And those were not used because they were to be scrapped or not usable or whatever. Today we have, unfortunately, overcapacity growing a little. And it is allowing us to have this agility towards the trade. So it's good for our customers.
Stephen, you've got the overview of all the trades.
Firstly, just on Audrey's point about the new building investments. I mean, in the shipping industry, we've got a bit. It's the typical problem: the new buildings come at the wrong time, just when you don't want them. But actually, if you think about all of the disruption, the resilience during COVID period, that came at a cost in terms of freight rates. But there's been huge investment from CMA and many other liner companies into new buildings. Most of those are green. We have 30% of the of the fleet on order, but that is helping resilience going forward. So I think that where that investment has gone to build resilience, I think is quite important. I think I did one other comment which I thought was quite interesting: 600 million tons from Rio's. The entire shipping industry, your customers. The entire shipping industry on a tank to wake basis emits 850 million tons of CO2. It's about 1 billion if you do it on well to wake.
Yes.
I think we definitely see a trend towards longer haul on commodity. Now, and I think that's a longer term trend. Most of that is driven by the two big energy sort of producers today from hydrocarbons, the US and the Middle East, which are both relatively long haul. And equally, certainly on the iron ore side, you also have Brazil and China, which are, Brazil and Australia, which are relatively long haul. So I think there's a clear long haul trend on commodity. And I would just, again, I think we've both said it a couple of times, it's the complexities around the liner side.
Yeah.
You know, it's not a reversal of some of those Asia trends, but clearly there's more complexity, which needs more flexibility, capacity, maybe different types of ships, different types of ports.
Yeah.
So I don't think we necessarily have to view some of these trends on the liner
It's
side
not
as yin and yang. I
Yeah.
think it's a little bit more subtle than that.
Yeah. No, that's good. Okay. We talked about the pandemic disruption and everything, and we talked about carbon. The issue with carbon is the climate change. I was reading just this morning, I think it was, forget which ship it was, the largest fully laden vessel to go through the Arctic, North Russia, to date. On the other hand, we've got box ships having to take off a layer of boxes to get through Panama at the moment. We've had various climate-related issues. I mean, Lloyd's Register's just put out a report saying that by 2050, there could be a number of ports that are unusable, but just because of the sea level rise that potentially takes place by as soon as 2050. I'm just wondering, how do we sort of manage those kind of, I mean, they're not even black swans, they're very much white swans. We know this is happening. I mean, does the Arctic sea route, is it a good or bad thing? Obviously, it's shorter ton miles between Asia and Europe. But is that going to be counterpointed by the risk of, having, I mean, obviously the Panama Canal is not going to close, but if there are restricted, and we have had ships backing up there and things. I mean, Stephen, you're sort of seeing those routes. I mean,
yeah, I mean, I mean, like lots of things in the world, there are going to be direct climatic impacts from these more frequent extreme events, and I think we all know that. Yeah. I think from a shipping's perspective, I suspect the larger focus is on the decarbonisation of our industry itself, and then potentially issues that come out of things like the food security that was mentioned. So, of course, there will be direct impacts like, the Panama Canal.
But I mean, it strikes me this is similar, if you have something like Panama, this is similar to the Black Sea being effectively closed to trade in some respects. So,
yeah, there's a mixture of things there. I think I haven't looked at the North-West Passage economics for some time, but when I did, which admittedly was a decade ago, I wasn't particularly convinced.
Yeah.
But then as the climate changes, and there's obviously a big geopolitical angle as well now, so I'm not again sure for mainstream shipping whether that's the focus. I think it's decarbonising our industry, understanding what that 40% of volume, which is energy, what will happen to that for our industry? Yeah. What will happen to grain security? Food security. I think those. Is that indirect rather than a canal will be closed because it's a drought? That's my initial thoughts on that one.
Laura, do you want to?
No, look, absolutely. I think that's. I mean, there will be unfortunately more and more of these events, and again, some routes like the Arctic route, will open. Which, can be seen as an opportunity, but fundamentally, I believe this is very sad because it means that climate change is accelerating. So we'll have definitely to deal with that part. But to Stephen's point, I think the energy transition, the climate change imperative, particularly for shipping, one of the hard to abate sector. I think if shipping was a country, it will be the sixth emitter. Despite their 3% or perceived low contribution in the broader scale of emission, but I really insist as well, towards the safety and the welfare of the seafarers. Making sure that we're also putting more light to the conditions that they're working in. I mean, we're seeing from the downstream industry and the customers, there is definitely more willingness, to understand where the materials are coming from, all the traceability, how they are produced, their impact to environment, where ESG credentials will be are more and more prevalent. And I believe that will also apply to supply chains, where we will want to see not only the carbon footprints of this supply chain, but also how basically we're improving the human sustainability and how we are also making sure treating well seafarers and in terms of safety. I was very shocked. I was saying, I'm only a year and a half into the shipping space, and seeing. I think there was the Allianz report in 2022, which basically give a pace of 1 fatality every week, which is totally unacceptable and shocking. And so we are still, in an industry that is working on fatality elimination and very seriously serious injuries elimination, instead of working to eliminate injuries.
Yeah.
So there is still a lot to be doing from that perspective.
Absolutely.
And the market, expected, will ask more responsible, not only just production, but supply chains.
Audrey, your sector was forced by events to have to find ways to flex around congested ports, and famously the Suez Canal getting blocked for a long time. Well, for a week, but we saw what chaos that caused. That lasted for 6 months, effectively. But again, to repeat that question, as far as I'm aware, CMA CGM has sworn it will never go around the Northern Sea route, and has no plans and won't. But given that, particularly if we do have issues, we've got issues with the intensity of hurricanes and things like that that are building up. Weather is becoming, and climate is becoming an issue. We do have the Panama Canal issue. Can container shipping adopt to that easily, or is that?
Well, we need to take a lot of actions. There are actions at the people level that can be taken. There are actions that, only big investments are going to be allowing the change to happen. So you need big corporations like us, like CMA CGM, but not only us. I give examples of us, but it's just to show the amount of investments that needs to be taken for that change to happen. So we need to take some very big decisions that we are not going to be taking in the northern routes. We need to be taking lots of actions with regards to allowing a better sustainability. So it's easy to say that we are going to be carbon neutral, like the minister was saying that we need to be carbon neutral by 2050. Okay, but what does it mean exactly? And so for that, we're not going to the northern routes. We are prioritizing LNG to power our ships. Okay, we're doing a lot of research and developments, and maybe we can talk about that a little, because the research and development part is huge for us to allow improvement in the years to come. CMA CGM, for example, is the first company to have tested biofuel, with biofuel being made of 20% of recycled vegetables. Okay, so we are very much developing a lot of research and development on that front. We have managed proudly to reduce our CO2 emissions by 50% since 2008 until 2022 by taking lots of actions, but that's only the beginning. We are going to be continuing to be taking a lot of different actions. We're working with the Energy Observer. Okay, it's the first hydrogen powered vessel. Okay, so we're doing a lot of research with a lot of companies around that vessels, and we're doing a lot of tests to find some new energy solutions. So you were mentioning about hydrogen. We're doing lots of research on hydrogen. We're doing lots of research on wind power. We're doing lots of research on solar. So this is all this is the future of shipping, isn't it? So this is pretty much what we need to do.
Yeah.
It's not only, we're not going to be taking the ships there. Unfortunately, if it was the only solution, it would be too easy. So there is a lot of investments that need to be there. Big organizations like us are the ones that can do it.
Yeah.
We are, yes, the shipping industry has been investing a lot and will continue to invest a lot. Okay, a big majority of our profit for CMA CGM has been reinvested, and a lot of investments have been done. We have put in place last year a big project, which is a 5-year, $1.5 billion dollars project, which is called Pulse. This Pulse project is actually an investment fund that we have put in place in order to accelerate the energy transition. Okay, so it's lots of different projects that are coming and are being decided through this fund, and we're very proud of it. It's going to be supporting industrial productions of new fuels. So I was mentioning about the new energies that are going to be looked at. We are going to be looking at new low emissions mobility solutions. So you see, it cannot be done only by initiative to the level of people. We need to have people invested. We are obviously having our organization, which is trying to incite people's investments into sustainability. And we are having a strategy with different pillars and telling our people to work for a better fair trade, to work for people, etc. And we are giving KPIs to our people to be saying, please find us some good initiatives. But at that level, it will not be enough. We need big organizations like us to do huge investments on that front. So,
because this is sort of answering my next question in a way, and I'll pass it to the other two as well. It's like, what are the innovations that are going to secure supply chains, make them more resilient, and get us to this decarbonised future?
Yeah.
Because I mean, you talk about biofuels and things, and these are all great initiatives, and the LNG initiatives and so on. But we're sort of trying to move to a hydrogen economy now, and yet, as I understand, I mean, you hear various figures touted around, but if you were to green shipping via hydrogen, you'd require the entire world's current output of hydrogen. To make sufficient hydrogen to decarbonize the world, you'd need more electricity than has been around in the history of electricity generation. So there do seem to be challenges there coming up. So how do we innovate our way out of these? Can we innovate our way to resilience? Can we innovate our way to a better, more secure trading environment that we need?
Yeah. So look, I'll build also on what Audrey mentioned on again, the shipping decarbonization, where we've seen definitely companies like CMA CGM, working a lot and investing a lot to reduce their scope 1 and 2 emission, which I guess all the companies are working towards, but they are not necessarily the same pace of development in the different shipping segments. But I mean, part of the innovation, I mean, we've seen a lot the container liners, putting a lot of orders, but I don't want to take the words out of your mouth, but when we look at it, on the dry side as well, the complexity and the real challenge is the access to the fuels. There are not enough fuels.
Yeah.
Yes.
They will not be able to power basically all these ordered vessels with green methanol, which is on the end state fuel use. So this is really a challenge. And why? Because we need this green methanol to be produced, and the green component is the one that makes it difficult with basically hydrogen production.
Yeah.
So innovation is also developing these technologies. The PEM technology is not mature, so we'll have to continue to develop. Alkaline is a little bit more advanced from that perspective, but still very early stages. So all the innovation towards bringing the new fuels to life, for which shipping doesn't have alternative. Batteries doesn't work. Hydrogen maybe for very, very small ships, but definitely not ours. And again, there will be R&D. I mean, we know that there are also some R&D on the nuclear development. I mean, ammonia. We've seen also MAN putting a lot of R&D man hours, into developing the
But
engines.
we were talking about seafarer safety before.
Yeah,
Do we
exactly.
really want to move?
No, absolutely. So, but all of this, I mean, it's I'm quite confident. I mean, we already operate, in a very toxic or dangerous environment, whether it's on the nuclear space, or ammonia, sulfuric acid, or sulfur environment. So we know how to do that, but it's basically more cost. I mean, to build the redundancy and this level of security the safety that we want for the people that operate. So all of this is definitely one areas of innovation. Where we're seeing also further innovation is definitely with the role to play of digital, which we've seen as well in terms of the energy efficiency. I mean, we'll come back to the different pathway, but digital is enabling the routing optimization, speed models, weather optimization, to make sure that we take the right lane. So in terms of impact towards climate change, digital can play a role. On the safety point of view as well, we've developed a platform to be able to integrate as many data as possible from ports, from RightShip, or from also our own vetting and inspections, and so on, and all the agents, to make sure that we can aggregate all this information and use analytics, AI analytics, to be able to support better practices and focus on where we need to improve the safety on board of the vessels, whether it's on our vessels, but also on our chartered vessels. So I think this component of digital will play a bigger role, and the traceability that I mentioned earlier, but also the ease of doing business with the EBL, electronic bill of lading, also that is not yet fully implemented across the industry. It's on the way, working a lot, with Binko and others to make sure this is happening, but that will participate as well to the transformation of the industry.
Good. Steve, you're looking at the order book. You've got a very good view on the crystal ball, as it were, as to what's sort of coming in the future, both with quantity and type. I mean, what are the innovations that you see, and what is
I suppose
both with the sort of trade lane stuff with trade, but also with the decarbonisation, the technology?
Of course, I mean, we could get very pessimistic because the average age of the fleet is increasing at the moment.
Yeah.
1/3 of the tonnage in the world, we think, would be D or E rated under this new CII regulations. Yeah. We only have 6% of the world's fleet capacity alternative fueled. So, and we have all these uncertainties and very difficult decisions about fueling choice. Yeah. I think on the positive side, I think nearly 50% of the order book by tonnage is alternative fueled, mainly LNG, but there's also methanol, and ammonia is coming.
Well, a lot of these are dual fuel ready. What's your take on that?
Those are the statistics very specifically for dual fuel. We have a different status for whether it's methanol ready or LNG ready, which would it make it easier to convert in the future. Yeah. So there's a little bit of upside on those data points. Okay. And I think we have to accept that this is a transition that is going to take a long time. Yeah. That it's multi-fueled approach depending on the size of ship, the type of ship. The car carrier industry has gone very heavy on LNG, or exclusively on their new building.
As is cruise.
As is cruise. And that there's a regional element. I also think that there's wonderful innovation going on, optimization, digitalization, also energy-saving technologies. We have to accept that, I was looking at some stats. By 2035, 72% of today's fleet will be over 20 years of age. So we have to do something to the existing fleet. Yeah. And so I think retrofitting, wonderful in sails, air bubble lubrication, Flettner rotors, silicon paint. I think the speed of ships.
I've read in propeller bosses can make a massive amount of difference on a large ship.
Absolutely, and I think that these companies are at the forefront of that.
Yeah.
And I do think the speed of ships, because the average ship today is speeding 15 to 20% slower than 2008. And that's the main reason.
How much slower can we go, though? Because I know a lot of these engines,
It's a good point, but
can
I
only go
think,
to-
I think,
And-
look,
and- sorry, Rob,
I'm not
yeah.
an engineer, but I think that there's a little bit of flexibility when we talk, maybe a knot slower. It has bigger implications for people on the liner side.
Yeah.
But I do think that the speed of ships is something that will continue to trend down. I think it's a lever that
Yeah.
we have that we can use quite quickly if we
A
need
good
to.
way to soak up capacity at the moment for in the liner sector. But I'm wondering if you're trying to get a shipment of iron ore from Brazil to China, you kind of want to get it there as soon as possible, do you not?
Yeah.
So slow steaming's perhaps not so good.
Well,
in
it's
the-
striking the right balance again. So
Business for you.
it's definitely something that is one of the levers. I mean, to Stephen's point, the way we approach it is on the pathway to decarbonization. I mean, energy efficiency is the first one, and has already happened. Great, to hear on the 50% reduction. We're at 34, so acknowledging that we still have some way to go, but we're targeting the 40% emission reduction relative to 2008 on a 2025 basis, so 5 years ahead of the IMO target. But we're putting a lot of effort. Again, as a ship owner, we own 17 vessels, but working also with our ship owners on the chartered fleet, which represent 230 vessels. So there is a lot, of work that we're doing with them to make sure, that the three levers that we're looking at is, yes, the energy saving devices. We've put actually through the dry docking exercise since the end of last year, this year, and beginning of next year. A lot of modification, the silicone paint, ductile propellers, and others, which will basically continue, to support us in delivering these efficiencies. But also we launched actually last year pioneering portal initiatives where we invited, industry players, but also startups to come and propose to us technologies with basically a grant of $2 million and install, these technologies on two of our ships, which actually now we're expanding and proposing as well to our chartered fleet and our the ship owners that we're working with to again accelerate on the adoption there. The other lever, we spoke about speed and all the optimization component, which will play a role. To which extent we can reduce, indeed, it will be an optimization in the end. But the third lever is actually the capacity of the vessels themselves. So about 7-8 years ago, we didn't have any new Newcastlemaxes to carry our iron ore. So we are essentially Australian, Western Australia to Southeast Asia. So we use essentially capes, and now we are basically having a bit more than 20% in our portfolio of Newcastlemaxes. So how we can also continue to work with our customers on the steel mill side and to make sure that we can basically increase the size of the vessels. That will also provide further efficiency in terms of fuel savings. And we've developed also port side activities, which is basically how we are unloading the iron ore in China and basically bringing as much volume and hence on bigger basically sizes, so then we can after that deal with the inland transportation, again on also ESG imperative.
We're coming very much to the end of the session, so I'm just going to finish up with a quick round robin for all of you, which is to just have a minute or two on what are the question I've got down here, what are the most significant levers of operational change to future trade that you see, and how far away are they? Is it short term, medium term, long term? Do we have to wait till 2050? Will we see it next year? And if we're back here, next year, 5 years, and in 2050, what are we going to be seeing different? So let's start with
look, Laura. From our perspective, energy efficiencies, they are really low investment costs, very short return on investment and payback. It's a must. And actually, potentially having required movement at pace, so that across all the fleets, their adoption of this energy saving devices and so on is a must. So that's something that we can do today and now. In the now as well, which we need, we need for the future, which is how we are adopting the end state fuels, and how there is basically an opportunity for developing this project. We see the market-based measure or having carbon levy or carbon prices as extremely important and urgent to have in place, particularly on a global basis, to make sure that we are not accelerating, in a way, the separation that we are seeing in the shipping industry with container liners, car carriers, which are closer to the end customers with an easier ability. I'm not saying it's easy, an easier ability to pay for the tiny incremental cost or total cost of the products that shipping decarbonization represents when we are shipping, computers, sneakers, iPhones, and so on. The incremental cost for decarbonizing the shipping leg is very marginal. It's actually 50 times lower than what it is, to basically decarbonize iron ore to Southeast Asia, for example, which again, on the backdrop of 600 million tons of CO2 plus in our Scope 3 emission, relative to basically shipping, which represent just 7 million tons global, including our Scope 3, is not their priority.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we don't want to see basically this separation of a green shipping and then the rest of the industry, we need carbon-based measure. And this is also what the MEPC 80, is also committing to look into, and that's now for the future to make sure that shipping is not left apart or seeing this distortion.
You were mentioning before about longer transit times and what the customers want, etc., etc., and potentially if the ships are going a little bit slower. It's not really about that. It's anymore. It's not about the 1 or 2 days extra that you're going to have into your cargo. It's about quality of service. It's about regularity about our service. It's about our capacity to be agile into the ever so changing demand of our customers and the environment that is changing all the time. So this is pretty much what
your customers as well.
And exactly, and the market in general, which I should say the market more than our customers. And so it's really much about the agility to adapt to the situation, and the situation is changing. We have had in the past 2 years, 3 years, like since 2020 and the pandemics, we have had a huge issue with regards to capacity and being able to serve our customers. We are now investing massively into decarbonization, but also into ensuring that we are giving the right capacity and the right level of service. Innovation is not only innovation in terms of sustainability, but it is also in terms of what we are doing in order to be able to serve all the needs of our customers. So today we are offering end-to-end services. We're looking at giving door-to-door services to our customers, etc., etc. So this is what we're doing. Today, the market in terms of shipping, I go back to shipping in particular, is changing very, very much, because today the issue that we are facing, and we're going to be looking at the short to medium term, like you mentioned, is going to be an overcapacity now. Is going to be, the markets are weak, the market is quite flat compared to, you were mentioning about it before, and the investments in terms of ships have been actually quite tremendous. So we are going to be having a little bit of an issue. The trade is quite flat, but the overcapacity is going to remain. Some numbers, just to put yourself into perspective, in the second half of 2023, we expect 1.3 million TEUs to join the market, extra capacity to be joining the market. That's 5% more than during the first half of the year 2023. And if you look at next year, 2024, we're going to be expecting 2.9 million TEUs extra. That's another 10% that is going to, so over 18 months, that's going to be really 15% of extra capacity coming into the market. The trade is definitely, the market is, the supply and demand is going to be having a bigger gap in a mid-term basis. So that's going to be an issue for us also as a shipping industry, because We are going to be definitely having an impact on the freight rates, a little bit of a reverse situation compared to what it has happened in the past 2-3 years.
What goes around comes around.
But at the same time, we need to continue investing. So this is where it's very difficult for us, because this investment needs to happen. Mid to long term, we're going to be having to have a huge challenge, which is the energy transition. Today, the global fleet needs to transition to zero emission fuel. We've just discussed it now. A ship, you're saying they are older and older, but a ship can live up to 25 years. And today, what does it mean? It means that we are going to be having some vessels that are going to go for scrapping. We're going to be having some vessels that are going to do retrofitting. So this overcapacity is going to help us in the medium to long term, because it's going to allow us to actually have that happening. But investments will continue to happen. So this is the vision for the medium to long term.
Steve, we started with you. I'm going to finish with you, but you have literally a minute.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. It's fine. Not at all.
Sure. Yeah, I think
take us through the same question.
From a longer term perspective, we're talking, in the next few decades. I think energy transition, absolutely. And I think we've discussed quite a bit about what that means for the ships and decarbonisation, but also what it means for the potential cargo base of energy. I'm convinced there will be some really exciting shipping trades, whether that's hydrogen, ammonia, carbon dioxide, supporting the offshore wind industry. So I think the energy transition. And then secondarily, I think we're moving into a different period on geopolitics. And I think that impacts our views on globalization versus regionalization, the sort of trading patterns that might evolve going forward. And I think we still believe in trade growth, but you've got a maturing but very large Chinese economy, and you've got very exciting economies in other parts of Asia. So, but I do think that the next phase of the economic development in the next few decades is going to be a bit different from that in the last few decades. So I think geopolitics and energy transition.
All right, love it. Which takes us very much back to where we started this whole event. Listen, that's been wonderful. I'm not going to add any more because we are fairly tight for time this morning. We're going to have, we've got Ian Stokes from Stella Maris is just going to come and say a couple of words about its charity. However, before he does, Stephen, Stephen, Audrey, and Laura, thank you very much. Can we have a round of applause, please? Thank you very much.